We will be having remarks from various members to unveil the release of the House Democratic Caucus agenda. I want to thank you for joining us for this presentation for the agenda that's titled Pro-Growth, Pro-Innovation, Pro-Alabama. Over the course of the last year, Alabama continues to feel the devastating effects of COVID-19 pandemic as a new variant continue to pose new challenges in every phase of our lives. We're keenly aware that this year is no different than the previous year. However, given the unprecedented issues we face as a state, this is not the time to play divisive partisan games or propose outlandish bills simply to create political controversy. Right now, it's time to rebuild and recover as we continue to deal with the deadly and mutating virus. That's why this agenda is solution-based and focused and driven by the ideas of pro-growth, pro-innovation, and pro-Alabama. When that happens, we all win, and we create opportunities for future prosperity and success. This defining moment is an opportunity to move Alabama forward and to manifest our unlimited potential. Now, I'd like to introduce my colleague, the Policy Director for the Alabama Democratic Caucus, Representative Atlan of Mobile, Alabama.
Thank you, Leader Daniels. In order for Alabama to move forward and to tap into that potential that Leader Daniels described, it's going to take significant investment and a sensible plan that focuses on sustainable, long-term economic growth. Alabama Democrats are stalwart champions of vibrant economic growth, and we strongly support strengthening small businesses by ensuring that they have financial and human capital that they need to thrive. Whether it's reducing the tax burden for family-owned businesses, ensuring fair wages, upgrading our supply chain infrastructure, or creating tangible opportunities for entrepreneurial innovation, House Democrats continue to lead the way in pro-growth policies that help all Alabamians prosper. We vehemently oppose the majority's efforts to defy and replace federal vaccination mandates with conflicting state mandates. This has now essentially resulted in the largest tax or burdens on small businesses in the history of Alabama. To be clear, we support spending federal COVID relief dollars the way they were allocated and intended. That includes expanding access to affordable housing by making sure that COVID housing relief monies are used to keep struggling families in their homes. For Alabama to achieve its highest economic potential, we must level the playing field by closing the income inequality gap. And we must meet the training demands of new high-tech industries. It's not only time to reinvest in traditional infrastructure upgrades, but also time to embrace new and emerging technologies that affect workers in every type of job. Alabama House Democrats believe that we must continue our efforts to support our local businesses by buying small and helping them access education and training to maintain their competitive edge and grow. Democrats understand the impact that COVID has had on the bottom line of small businesses, and that's why we propose a COVID release tax break for small businesses in Alabama. We also must make certain that public spending is fair by including minority and women-owned businesses in state procurements. Further, we must end the regressive tax on groceries, which disproportionately hurts the poorest and most disadvantaged among us. We know that we must invest in Alabama because economic growth does not happen on its own. And please let me introduce my colleague, Representative Peblin Warren, who represents constituents in Tallapoosa, Macon, and Lee counties in House District 82. Representative Warren.
Thank you, Representative Clark. All the money in the world won't do much if we are too unhealthy and too sick to reap its benefits. Too many among us lack access to care they need and deserve. That's why Alabama House Democrats continue to stay focused on affordable health care. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to evolve and strain our entire healthcare system, we must increase our capacity for testing, vaccination, boosters, and other public health measures to mitigate and eradicate the virus. The pandemic made evident the many gaps in Alabama healthcare system, including hundreds of thousands of citizens who still remain uninsured. The lack of adequate mental health resources and an alarming shortage of physicians and healthcare workers. Simply put, there's never been a more important time to expand Medicaid, and we must do everything we can to ensure access to affordable quality health care. In addition, we believe the state should add dietitians as well as nutritional and vascular services to the list of reimbursable Medicaid procedures. This will provide short and long-term health benefits for many thousands of people in our state. House Democrats will continue to fight Alabama's high rate of infant mortality by advocating for the expansion of Medicaid services, particularly to new mothers. We will continue to find ways to incentivize and bring doctors and healthcare workers to Alabama. This includes enhancing and increasing telemedicine programs and helping struggling hospitals avoid closure. We know that a healthy Alabama is the basic foundation for our wellness, growth, and prosperity. Thank you, and let me introduce Representative Barbara Drummond, who hails from Mobile, representing House District 103.
Thank you, Representative Warren, and good afternoon to everyone. We want to turn our attention to the critical importance of education innovation in the state of Alabama. Alabama House Democrats know that our children deserve the best in education, so that upon graduation they are career ready for whatever field they choose. It starts with investing and expanding pre-K programs, closing the achievement gap, and increasing dual enrollment programs for high school students. We've asked so much of our educators and our students through this unprecedented pandemic. But that is why you will find the House Democrats who are asking the state to delay the implementation of the retention portion of the Literacy Act. We want all of our children to be ready for what tomorrow holds for them. But this pandemic has put us in a very, very cruel position that we can move forward. We should not penalize teachers and students for circumstances that are obviously beyond their control. In fact, in light of the new demands on educators as we continue to battle this pandemic, this also means continuing our efforts to increase teachers' pay. We support a cost of living adjustment for our retired educators, as well as a pay raise for all educators, including administrators and support personnel. This is how we attract and retain the very best and the brightest for our children's education. House Democrats support innovation in education, for example, public-private partnerships that allow young people the hands-on experience and training they need to compete for jobs in the future. That also means refocusing and individualizing some educational efforts to prepare students for middle-skilled jobs, those which require education past high school, but not a 4-year degree. For those that do not attend public colleges and universities, House Democrats call for a greater investment in need-based scholarships, and financial aid. We know that a well-educated Alabama is how we secure our brightest future. We want to thank you again, and I now introduce my colleague, Representative Neil Rafferty.
Thank you, Representative Drummond, and good afternoon, everyone. So, as John Lewis famously said, your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most powerful, non-violent tool we have to create a more perfect union. In our cherished democracy, there is nothing more sacred, more fundamental, and more well fought for than our constitutional right to a free, fair, and honest election. Alabama House Democrats know that voting should be made easier and more accessible to all citizens. No one should have to spend hours in line to have their voice heard, especially during a pandemic. Simply put, it's time to once and for all put an end to voter suppression in all its forms. We should have more than just one day, especially during a pandemic, to allow eligible citizens to vote. Most importantly, we must ensure that our election system is not only accurate, but safe from the type of dangerous political forces that led to the failed but destructive and deadly insurrection on our nation's capital on January 6th of last year. No person, faction, or party should ever have the power to overturn a legitimate, free, and fair election simply because it did not turn out in their favor. We must do everything we can to protect our right to vote and keep our elections free from domestic and foreign meddling. For the legislature to be truly representative, all voices must be heard, and we must work to increase voter participation. House Democrats know that to increase voter turnout and participation, we must allow early voting, create automatic voter registration upon the age of 18, eliminate requirements to pay fines and fees to regain the right to vote. And we must expand eligibility for the restoration of voting rights. We support voter education and ensuring that the elderly and infirm can exercise their democratic rights safely and securely. Unnecessary bureaucratic barriers to voting must be removed so that no eligible voter is denied the right to vote. We know that voting rights are the cornerstone of our democracy, but even more importantly so, we know that your voice is the cornerstone of that vote. So thank you, and I would like to now introduce Representative Prince Chestnut, who represents constituents of Dallas and Perry counties for House District 67.
Thank you so much, Representative Rafferty. Let me begin by saying that we are a nation and a state based on the rule of law. We believe in a justice system predicated on doing what is fair and doing what is right. House Democrats have long championed the critical need for a comprehensive and pragmatic approach to the state's prison crisis, criminal justice system, and social justice issues. It will take more than bricks and mortar to fix the Alabama prison problem. It was a mistake for the majority to use federal COVID-19 relief dollars to fund prison construction and not implement, along with it, significant reforms. You must address an issue holistically. We will continue our efforts to repeal the 2019 Habitual Felony Offender Act, an onerous, consecutive, or mandatory sentencing guidelines. We seek to reduce recidivism and boost the success rate of ex-offenders' re-entry into society as productive citizens. We must also address the many problems within our broken Pardons and Parole Board. There's a lack of guidance, a lack of transparency, and accountability. The process for earning a parole or pardon should be objective, it should be evidence-based, and it should be subject to an open and timely appeals process. Justice for all means acknowledging that every person has value and all persons are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Each person has fundamental human and civil rights that must be protected. Racism and unlawful discrimination have no place in Alabama in 2022. We will continue to fight to eliminate the vestiges of racism, slavery, and oppression, and stand against the efforts to diminish our rights to peaceably assemble. We know that no one is free when others are oppressed. We know that justice for some is not justice for all. I thank you, and at this time, I'd like to turn it over for closing remarks from our minority leader, Representative Anthony Daniels.
Thank you very much. And you've heard from our members the bold vision that the House Democrats are laying out for the 2022 legislative session. Many of the things that they talked about are not anything new. Every year, we try to make certain that we're assessing the needs of the state and also following the guidelines and guidance from our constituents. Now, many of the things that are highlighted are not limited to what we feel is important to this state. One of the things that we've long championed that may not have been mentioned, but we're still in support of, is still removing the tax off groceries. And so what you heard today is where we're headed. Now, we heard earlier this week of the plan that's standing wrong for Alabama on the other side, folks on the other side of the aisle. Because there are a couple of things on there that doesn't exist and that should not be prioritized. They talk about critical race theory, but Governor Ivory says that it doesn't exist in Alabama, and it doesn't exist in our K-12 system. And so we're taking on issues that are doesn't exist in our state. Then you have issues like permitless carry. Easy access for a person that may be mentally disturbed and been denied access to a gun permit will now have the option to be able to get access to a gun without going through the permitting process, which then it protects and hurts our public safety. This is an issue that we're on the same side of law enforcement, and we're working alongside all the citizens of Alabama because this is a dangerous president. And they talk about introducing a bill to push to impact rioting. And they reference Birmingham in one of the articles that I read. But they failed to say one word about January 6th. Not one person stood up and spoke against January 6th. And so focusing on issues that's not good for Alabama. When there are 17,000 families of people in this state that's missing the family member. 17,000 lives that have been lost as a result of COVID-19. 17 hospital closures over the course of the last 10 years. A prison system that we're not reducing recidivism. We're warehousing people. And so those are critical issues that people care about. We didn't talk about small businesses that have been struggling as a result of the pandemic. Our restaurant industry, our retail, our other healthcare providers. But yet we're focusing on things that continue to divide us as a state. Those days should be gone. And the people of Alabama deserve a vision like the vision that's been laid out by my colleagues behind me today. And that's what we intend to do. We intend to fight for the people of Alabama, the working families, the poor, all sectors of Alabama, by making certain that we are creating a perfect Alabama. Pro-innovation, pro-business, also pro-education. That was not mentioned, but pro-education. And so we appreciate you guys for coming today and to cover this so that the people of Alabama will see where we stand during the time of crisis and what we're prioritizing, and we're putting them first. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming. And thank you for joining us today, and we'll entertain any questions that any of you may have. Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Daniel, good to see you. You mentioned that what's good for Alabama. And I say that to start off my question because many of you have also mentioned what's good for Alabama is having a healthy Alabama. And you in particular, we spoke on this recently, someone who has dealt with COVID personally, twice yourself, and other members, no doubt, who have had people that have touched them that have dealt with COVID. Is it tough to get the message out and with your colleagues from across the aisle that, before you have any plans to do anything, we need to address the COVID issue, because until we do that, we might be stuck in limbo because it is still there, it is still prevalent.
Absolutely, and I think that is important. That point is extremely important because if we're not managing COVID in general, it impacts the people that we're trying to issue tax breaks for. Retail industry, our hospitals, and we're losing people in professions all across the state as a result of the lack of management. And so, in the special session, we dealt with this vaccine mandate. They responded to a mandate with a mandate and a tax on top of it, right? And so, what's progressive about that? There's nothing progressive about that. Businesses that receive contracts from the federal level, that send tax dollars to Montgomery for us to be able to distribute money across the state to fund our essential services, that not in Alabama on an incentive or a tax break, but chose to be in Alabama because this is where they wanted to raise their family and where they wanted to continue and expand their business operations. But yet we are trying to prevent them, pass the bill to tax them because they're following the federal guidelines of saying that if you want to institute a policy that requires your employees to be vaccinated, that you can terminate them. But we passed a bill to force small businesses to have to pay up to, on average, $10,000 for up to 37 days if they terminate someone that's a risk to the public safety and health of their business. That's wrong. You don't respond to a mandate with a mandate and a tax. And so those are the things that we must address. And we got to manage this crisis because economically we're going to face challenges long term. Businesses that's not going to be able to come back online. We've already seen, as a result of this pandemic, approximately 40% of minority-owned businesses are not able to come back because the pandemic has really evaporated those businesses. And so we got to figure out how do we help these businesses survive, but also in a pandemic-proof way. And we've not discussed any of that. Any more questions? Thank y'all for your, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get everybody ready to go. I know you touched on education, I know you touched on business. There was also talk about addressing things from a green standpoint in the state of Alabama, because a lot of states, Alabama included, are looking at ways to help their states turn green. And in doing so, help from a business standpoint, get people employed, and from a health standpoint, get people healthier. Is that a good idea for you, sir, and anyone else who maybe wants to jump in and answer that?
I would say that I would certainly want other members that want to answer this question to be able to respond to it. But I think that when you're talking about environmental issues, and I think that's what you're referencing when you say green.
Yes, sir.
We applaud the effort of the governor for the electric vehicle investments. We know that in the infrastructure bill, there's about $80 billion dedicated to focusing on electric vehicles. In Alabama, as a leader in the automobile industry, we have two of our manufacturers in particular that's taking on the leadership role in this, and that's Mercedes and Hyundai. And they're going to be on their assembly line this year or late this year. They'll be focusing on those particular efforts, which will help us long term create. It helps the environment. That's without a doubt. But it'll help us in many other ways. And so when you reference green in general, I think that there are a lot of efforts. Let's talk energy efficiency, and other areas in the area of green. And so we're looking at all of those things. We just, for this particular year and where we're responding to a pandemic, it's important, but it's just not at the top of our list of focal points.
One thing, if I can, don't bleed your ears. Last week at the House Republican Caucus announcement, they were saying that they're going to try a new strategy when they have their bills on the floor in terms of having teams of people working with the bill sponsor, that there was going to be a floor manager to help with the passage whatever proposals they are coming up with. Anybody heard about that, and anyone want to talk about, what do you think about that?
They do it all the time.
Yeah,
They borrow that.
Yeah, that's, you're talking about, yeah, I think they've been on, I mean, they've been dealing with this particular issue for some time. And I understand where they're coming from. It's just fortunate we have really strong members in our caucus, and we've had our team doing this for about 3 years. And so, you know, I do see that whatever's working, you can repeat that. And so, good luck with that. But they have to start with actually having a bold vision for Alabama. Because if it doesn't matter how many times you coach a person at the microphone or you have a strategy. Look, they got 77 members in their caucus, our 28. They can pass anything they want, anytime they want. And, you know, to have a strategy, I mean, cloturing us has been the strategy to limit debate, and also cloturing us from being able to argue points against some of the bills that have been introduced. And so I think that's probably going to be the same concept. And so there's nothing different in the game plan.
Anthony, I just want to comment on the environmental issues.
Yes, sir.
It's one thing, you know, we're moving ahead and going green and making sure that we're saving and cleaning the air. But the thing that has been very disturbing to me in Alabama, if we look at all of our waste dump areas, they're all in minority communities. We're going to have to be more forceful in making sure that the testing is up to date, our water, our clean air, because every time they put a new dump in the state of Alabama, it's in a black community. So we're going to have to really check up on how they're monitoring and giving permits, because in my district alone, in Tallapoosa County, every day there's probably 200-300 trucks coming from Michigan, just dumping stuff, dumping. We don't know what these people are bringing to Alabama, but it's right in a black neighborhood. So we're going to have to make sure, as a caucus, we're going to put some emphasis on making sure that ADM is doing what they're supposed to be doing to ensure that those communities are safe and remain safe.
That it?
I have a question. Excuse me if this is redundant. I missed the portion of the press conference. So last night in the State of the State, Governor Ivey asked legislators to prioritize those COVID funds. Has there been discussion within the caucus about the bills that you want to propose for those COVID funds? And if so, would you be able to disclose any of those discussions?
So I'll answer a portion of that, because we have a caucus meeting at 3 o'clock where we'll be discussing COVID funds and COVID dollars. I think what's extremely important is getting guidance from Treasury and from the White House on exactly what our limitations are with the COVID dollars. We certainly feel that healthcare is always an important issue for us, that we have to make investments in healthcare. There are dollars in other bills, not just COVID funds, but other bills that are passed at the federal level as it relates to broadband. But the key thing here is a lot of the dollars that we're trying to move around, and when we create grant programs and opportunities, remember those communities have to come up with some matching funds. And so what we have to be careful about is how we administer, or the way we administer those funds, because we could be in the same situation that we're in today tomorrow. Because there are communities across the state of Alabama that have not been collecting tax revenue at the level that they have been in the past. So therefore, it would limit their ability to draw down on or apply for any grant to do any type of infrastructure development or even do anything in their local communities. And so we just got to look at this problem holistically to make certain that all communities have a fair shot across the board, and not communities that can afford it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.